So, hello, everybody. It's Stephanie Baker, and we're back for another episode of On the Couch. I want to take a couple of minutes and just remind everyone of the objectives for why we do this podcast. And it's really pretty simple for us as counselors, and Life in Abundance being a counseling ministry. We believe that by offering biblical counseling, we can strengthen families, which then strengthen our community. And so, in doing that, there are topics with counseling. There are connotations to counseling, negative connotations sometimes, and people are afraid of it. And we kind of want to take the mystery away from counseling topics. And so, during the course of these podcasts, you're going to hear me from time to time interviewing different counselors. Not every counselor that I interview will actually be on our team. But we have different counselors who are trained in different areas that we'll speak to on subjects that you may find of interest if you've been considering going to counseling, or you may know somebody that's in need of counseling, and that may be something you can share with them. The other things that we do on this podcast are talk about local ministries that have resources that you may find helpful, but maybe you didn't hear about them until the podcast. So we want to make sure that we're highlighting local ministries that have wonderful services that are doing to offer and are doing great work within the community. The other thing that we focus on is functional nutrition and functional medical topics. And if you have ever watched one of our podcasts in the past, you may have already seen the different topics I've talked about, and also the functional nutrition and functional medicine topics, and various doctors, functional medical or nutrition providers that I've had the pleasure to interview in past podcasts. We believe that we are body, soul, and spirit beings. And so we're looking at our clients that we have at Life in Abundance as whole persons. And so sometimes when we have things going wrong with our body or physically, it's going to impact our emotions. And so we're looking at everything, which is why that topic is so dear to my heart. Now, here comes the disclaimer that I give every single entry part of our podcast, and that is that I am a clinical pastoral counselor. I am not licensed by the state. I'm also the executive director for Life in Abundance, as well as being a clinical pastoral counselor on staff. I'm also a certified functional nutrition counselor. And so with that said, what I'd like to do is introduce our first our first and only guest for today's podcast. Her name is Hannah Dendy. Hannah is such a blessing in my life, and we go back a ways. I will tell you, she has given us permission to acknowledge that she is a past coaching client of mine from when my career was just getting started. And so it is a pleasure to have her here. And we're going to talk about her journey. Her testimony is incredible, and it's very powerful. And we're going to talk in that a little bit about identity and the messages that we believe about ourselves, the things that we hear in society. And we're going to talk about how that impacts us versus what the Word of God has to say about who we are. And so Hannah is awesome. And without further ado, Hannah, welcome to On the Couch.
Hi, Miss Stephanie. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing good. Yeah. Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure. So what I would like us to do is to start with you sharing a little bit about your journey. What brought you to me years ago? You were seeking a Christian perspective. At that time, it was in coaching, because that's what I was doing and starting my counseling career. But tell me a little bit about what brought you to my office in the early days.
I think what initially, because I was rather young when we first met, I think. If I'm not mistaken, I believe that my sister had signed up for a class that you were teaching. And that is how we initially met. And then I think after that, I think you started seeing me and maybe my sister, and it wasn't just me. I think like a few of my family members started to see you. But I think the initial draw was just the professionalism, and it really felt like you had a lot of insight to offer. And so, but after a while, of seeing you consistently, it really kind of changed into more of a personal thing. I felt
Mhm.
like I wasn't really certain what was off about my life. I think when I was younger, I feel like I had a lot of problems making a definitive statement and defining what the issue or what the struggle was.
Mhm.
But I just started to become more aware that there was a problem, right? And that I was going through something. I felt a lot of confusion about things. And so then that's when the page kind of turned. And I think you and I started to have more in depth conversations about that.
Mhm.
And at one point in time, I do recall, I can't recall the session that we were having, but I do recall that we had a meeting where I think I just kind of told you that I felt like I was struggling with an identity issue.
Mhm.
And um, and so yeah, at that point we just took a turn and started to dive into that. Yeah.
Mhm. Okay. And so then there was a time frame where you weren't seeking counseling or coaching, because actually it was coaching when we started, but there was a time
Right.
when you weren't seeking that. And you have shared with me that there were things that I was telling you that you weren't ready to hear. So
Yeah. So,
can you elaborate a little bit about your journey?
oh yeah. So, I mean, for sure, when you when you kind of are in a frame of mind where you're being selfish and you want the things that you want for your life, I think sort of the first step for anybody is to get rid of the people who are telling you anything other than that. And
Mhm.
so for me, unfortunately, that was you. And not only you, I think I was fortunate at that time to have a lot of people in my life who were willing to speak the truth to me, but I just wasn't able to hear it. I
Mhm.
felt very unloved and disconnected. And I found something that was filling that hole for me.
Mhm.
And so to ask me to give that up or to try to encourage me to come to God or to bring that to God or, what have you, it felt like,
Mhm.
you were telling me I'm thirsty and to not drink water. That's what it felt like. And so I just couldn't hear it. I just couldn't have it. So, yeah, so after a while of seeing you about that particular topic, it just felt like I wasn't going anywhere. It felt like it was coming to a halt. And so I just made the decision to separate and we didn't speak. And over the course of that time, a lot happened. A lot. Looking back on it, it's almost comical that I had to go through so much to come back to this place. It seems like you go through something and God kind of gives you stopping points, and I just like blew through every single one of them. And so
Yeah.
yeah, but I had introduced you to the person that I was dating at the time. You had the opportunity to meet her in your office,
Mhm.
and we ended up getting married. And
Mhm.
let's see, we were together for quite a long time. I think we were together for a total of 7 years, and out of that, I think we were married for 3 or 4 years. So, but anyway, it was just awful. I mean, it was just a really awful time, and it just seemed like no matter how awful it was, how I just remember how desperate I was to hang on to it. And
Mhm.
it seemed like I was just grabbing that relationship with both hands and just white knuckling to hold it together no matter what, because I felt
Mhm.
my self esteem and my worth and you know in anything that was a part of me, deeply a part of me, was just so attached to that relationship. And so I stayed. And I know now that it was never going to work because God wasn't going to allow me to stay there. But, at the time, it was a series of horrible things. She eventually, at some point, I don't really know when it happened, but um, she started to practice a pagan religion. which was so foreign to me. I've never heard of anything like that before, or gone through that, but it was really scary. I remember really seriously being afraid. And she set up an altar in our house, and she just all this crazy stuff she was bringing home. And then on top of it, I felt like I had to go through it by myself, because keep in mind, I have excommunicated all the people from my life that care about me. And,
Right.
At the root of it, my family just didn't want me to be in the relationship. And so all roads led back to that. And that wasn't what I was prepared to hear. So it just felt like something I was on an island having to just go through. And then, I think that sort of started to be a little bit more divisive for us. And then that started to be followed by the adultery. And so she started stepping out. So she essentially kind of hit the road.
I want to ask you a question, if I may. So we're talking about a same-sex relationship, right? Earlier, you mentioned that there were things that you were being told. You referred to it as truth. You referred to being told truth by me, truth by others. Let's define what that truth, where did that truth come from? Was it my personal truth? Or was it your parents' personal truth? Or was it truth from the Word of God? I think we need to be specific.
Oh yeah, I'll be specific, and I'll as I tell the story, I guess I tell it from the perspective of what I was thinking then, and so.
Yes, right,
But
right.
but yeah, for sure. To be clear, when I say that, I definitely am referring to a biblical truth. It's not an
Okay.
opinion
All right. So
of
you had
anyone.
people, so you had others in your life at that time that were speaking biblical truth to you, and you were
Correct.
just kind of like, no, I want what I want. Is that sort
Right.
of okay? All right. And
Yeah.
so where we were before the technical glitch there, you were talking about the person that you were with having set up altars in your home, and your family had sort of been, you felt like you were alone. You couldn't depend on them because they weren't in approval of the relationship. And then you mentioned adultery. And I think that's where we left off.
Oh yeah. So I was just saying that as she began to travel for work, she essentially kind of established an entirely different life in a different state,
Mm-hmm.
and and so anyway, we just continued to grow apart, and obviously it caused a lot of problems. And just speaking separate from the same sexual relationship, it just was relationship problems, blanket,
Mm-hmm.
period. And
Okay.
so anyway, once that came out, that was the catalyst for a divorce that needed to happen. And so you would think,
Where were you with God at this point? Like what were you thinking about God, about faith at this time?
I don't think there was ever a time when I didn't believe that God existed, but I
Mhm.
definitely did not see him as having any relevant or personal like aspect in my life.
Gotcha.
I felt, you know, early on from a lot of kind of traumatic events in my childhood that he was just distant.
Hmm.
And like I said, the whole issue is whether it's this, whether it's drugs, whether it's alcohol, the whole issue is that you feel as a person inside, obviously there's something missing and you're just
Hmm.
wanting to fill that hole, right? And
Right.
so for me, this person was the thing that filled it.
Hmm.
And so the whole problem is that I wasn't seeking God to fill it. So, um, but anyway, with that, we ended up getting divorced, and this is what I laugh about with the stopping points is like you would think it's at that between all of that and just the years of it that would have been a good place for me to let go, but I didn't, and so I'm certain that the problem is not anything to do with the biblical principle of what I have going on. It's just about the relationship, right? And so
Right. Right.
yeah, and so I trudge ahead on right into the next one just to find more problems. Um, And that was a really, I think the next relationship was the worst, but I think now looking back, I think it was the most necessary, because
How so? How so?
hurt and depravity does not have a bottom. Um,
Wow.
it just doesn't. I think we think it does, but it doesn't. And
Mhm.
um, for me, I had told myself, because I wasn't really ready to face reality, I think I made maybe sort of a subconscious list of things that were the problem, right?
Mhm.
And so going forward into the next relationship was like just hitting that checklist.
Mhm.
And so I really allowed a lot of things that didn't make any sense. Um, I started seeing someone who was, I mean, heavily using drugs, and that didn't bother me. It just seemed like that was her business. Um, really liked to party, just stayed in a party scene. And that isn't my personality, but, that was okay too.
Mhm.
And then she introduced me to something called polyamory, which, if you're unfamiliar, is just the practice of having multiple partners in a relationship.
Mhm.
And I didn't like that either, but I thought that that was okay. And I think ultimately I just felt like if I set myself up in a way where I was okay with this behavior, then I couldn't be hurt by it later. And so, but that's what I say, that we think that there is a bottom to where our hurt will drive us, and there's not. Okay. And that's why I think it's really important to connect our spiritual well being with our mental well being, because this mind, it'll take you as far as you let it. It'll just, one thing will compound onto another, onto another. We won't have a stopping point. And without Christ guiding our steps and
Mhm.
being leading our thoughts and filling our heart, you will head in places that you never thought you would go.
Right. Which is
And
why God tells us in his word to renew our minds constantly, right?
absolutely.
Um, what what was missing that drove for you? What was missing when you look back now? What was missing in your life that drove you into the a you feel drove you into same-sex relationship, and then relationship trying to fill whatever? What do you feel like was the catalyst for that or behind that?
For me personally, I would
Mhm.
say that it was not having a good or prominent father in my life. My parents are together. They have always been
Mhm.
together. I live in a two-parent household,
Mhm.
but my father, I mean, really seriously, severely suffers from narcissistic personality disorder, and so he is detached from. He's not able, whatever happens in our emotions and our mental capacity that causes us to form bonds with
Mhm.
other humans, he
Right.
can't do it. And so it's really strange thing to describe to people sometimes when I talk about the things he does, and the most common immediate response I get is, well, you're his kid. And it's almost laughable because, but not through his eyes.
Right.
That does not matter. And so I think growing up, that your parents' role is to take care of you and protect you.
Mhm.
And when your first interaction, the first man that you have an interaction with is your father.
Mhm.
And mine taught me that not only was he not going to protect me, but also that he was the harm. And it felt like growing up, it fell to me to secure myself. And so I used to describe it as a monster. It's almost like a Hulk started to just develop inside of me that
Mhm.
was certain, you know, it was the role of that beast to make sure that I was safe all the time. And when you take on that role, God has He created man to fill one role, right? And He created women to fill another. We we are equal in that we are children of God, but we serve
Right.
different purposes.
Yes, I would agree with that.
And so when you take on a role that is not yours, right?
Hmm.
A transformation happens. And I started to take on the masculine characteristics that I did not have, that weren't modeled to me
Hmm.
the way that they should have been. So the thing about the thing about sin is it's only ever just a manipulation of the gifts that God has given us, right? And so when you have a person, right, men and women are supposed to be together, okay? But when you have a person who is breathing all the masculine air in the room,
Hmm.
what's left for them to match with?
Right.
And so almost when you think about it that way, it almost is a default response. I didn't feel like I had a man in my life, so I just
Mhm.
became it.
Okay.
And then after that, the only thing left for me to pair with and to bond with was women, and that was just it. And so,
Well, and there's two things here. So we have the person that is supposed to, in thinking, right, be the safe person and protector of you and the family. That person has become dangerous to you. And there's a lesson there that I heard. You didn't say it, but that I heard. He is not safe. Therefore, at a young age, men are not safe.
correct.
Right? And
Yeah.
so then the other part that I heard you say actually out loud was I had to make sure that I was safe, that I took care of myself in that way. Did I get it right?
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
Okay. So then where's the enemy? Like describe for me briefly. So that's what you're dealing with at that point in your life. How old are you at that time?
Young, I mean, when I first started to become aware of the thoughts and feelings, even before I acted on it, it was like 8, 9, 10, 11.
Right.
Like,
Okay.
yeah,
And you were raised in a home that believes what scripture says, which is marriage is between a man and a woman, right?
that's right.
And sex outside of marriage is wrong.
Hmm.
It's not, it doesn't, it's not what God would have for us for many reasons, right? So how did you, how did that go with your parents? How did the conversation of, hey, I want to introduce you to so and so, and she,
Well, it didn't happen until I was an adult.
right?
Um, but I had started seeing her, and I think that obviously I mean, they started to suspect, they started to put it together.
Mhm.
But it wasn't until we got ready to get married that I said, I'm just going to sit down and say it out loud.
Okay.
And I mean, it went horribly wrong. I think my mom was as I respected my mom's response. She was very calm and collected. She had always made it very clear that she was not in support of this,
Mhm.
but she was never mean to me about it. And I respected that because for me personally, I just, at that time and now, um, I believe people have the right to their beliefs,
Mhm.
and you don't, I feel like a lot of times the agenda of the LGBTQ is to just shove their thoughts and their beliefs down people's throats. And I can't stand it. You can't tell people, you know, what they should think. And so it didn't bother me. I felt like she's being true to herself and I'll be true to myself. Right. And that's just how I laid it out at the time. My father was horrible. He had, I mean, just an irate response. He called both me and her a lot of names, and it was just very ugly. It was terrible. I think I mean, that made me regret even doing it, because it just turned into something so explosive. It almost turned physical. I mean, between he and I, it got really bad. So,
So here you are, you've grown up, I've got to take care of myself, and I'm going to be that which I don't have, and men are not safe. And so it moves into adulthood. You enter into relationships that, based on what you've talked about, led to emptiness, and you actually called it depravity, right? And so, what turned things around? When did you go, I can't do this anymore? I
so
don't want to do this anymore.
like I said, the relationship after the marriage was the worst one, but a necessary one,
Mm-hmm.
because I hit a lot of low points for myself in that time span. And it was pretty quick, like maybe a year and a half. And so, yeah, just everything that I was involved in at the time, it just was a point where I remember looking in the mirror and I just was like, I don't even know who this person is. And that's a really terrifying feeling, to not know who you are. And so after that, I think a separation between she and I started to happen. I just initiated it. I decided, I was really blessed at that time. I had a really good job in sales and I was doing really well. And so I decided I was going to get my own place. I just wanted to be alone. And I did. I got a really nice apartment in a really great area in Greenville, and separating, just being by myself, that made the biggest difference. It just felt like, for the first time in my life, it felt like I could take a deep breath. And sitting alone and having routine and just spending time with myself,
Mm-hmm.
uh, I think it gave my mind time to think about healthier things. I just started to have healthier thoughts. There's just no other real way to explain it. But I remember thinking that I don't have any friends, and I said, "But I don't want friends like the ones I've been having." And so I asked, like, how do you have high quality friends?" And I Googled it. I Googled that question, and it came back, and every response said, "Well, you need to be the type of person that you want to be friends with." And I said, "Okay, well, that's my problem." And so I just put a lot of things, I was drinking at the time, and smoking at the time, and I stopped all of it, and I started going to the gym, and then I started going back to church at Brookwood. And so, just trying to shape myself into the type of person that I thought I'd like to be friends with.
Mm-hmm.
And then along that way, I started to realize, like, there was things I wanted to overcome, and that I needed to have future goals for myself. And that's what put me in contact with a guy named John, and he's a life coach. And John is not a Christian, but he was very understanding to kind of my story, the things that I told him. And he's a great guy. And so John begins to coach me, and my life just went in a different direction. It just did. It started to just escalate very quickly. But with that being said, I
In a
still
good
wasn't,
way?
yeah, in a very positive way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Um, Everything improved. Just I started to feel more fulfilled inside, and feel like I had purpose, and feel like I had goals. And, and so, but at that time, I still wasn't, the dots were not fully connecting to me. I felt
Mm-hmm.
like I was in a healthier place, and that meant I could have a healthier relationship, but I was still always picturing that with a same sex partner, right? And so, anyway, later on in the year, I went to a birthday party of a friend of mine, and that was where I met the last relationship with a woman I've ever had. And um, it's really not a tragic story. We met, and we were really good friends and very compatible, and everything was going very well. And then one day, she told me she didn't want to talk to me anymore. Um, and like I said, always in hindsight, you can see how God is working in your life. But speaking
Mm-hmm.
from the perspective at the time, I mean, no, I wasn't. I wasn't hearing that.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
Looking
anyway,
back at that in hindsight now, what do you see that God was doing? since it's hindsight now.
Since it's hindsight now, he was moving things out of my way that I couldn't have anymore. I know now that God was preparing me to go to a place, and I just could not bring those things with me. I couldn't bring those with me. And that finally, all of my life journey was like I draw a picture for people like I was a sheep who just walked out of the pen and was like, I got it, you know? And so my whole life has been me walking away, making my own path, right?
Right.
And so the whole time it felt like, because I never turned around, it felt like the shepherd and the pen, it was so far behind me. And I never realized that the entire time the good shepherd has been on my heels. And so um, she called and we talked only a few minutes, and the long and short of the conversation was that she didn't want to see me anymore. Okay. And I was just absolutely devastated by that. And I remember being devastated about it for months until one day, and mind you, at the time, nothing's changed. I'm still going to Brookwood Church, right? And I'm still, and but I remember one day driving, and it just upset me so much that I was just absolutely sobbing into my windshield, right? And I think I had the most honest conversation I've ever had with God, where I pretty much just said, I know what you want from me. I know what scripture says. I know it all. I got it. I don't care. I don't care about that. I
Yep.
want you to deliver this to me because this is what I want. And if you're not going to do that, then you got to set me free from this, because I can't keep going on with this in my mind. I have no other thoughts. I'm consumed, with this girl. So you either got to cut me loose or you got to let me have it. And the next day, um, the next day, I tried to reach out to her, and it didn't go well. And I remember she responded to me with a horrible, it was so mean. It's not funny. I mean, it was so mean. It was like the meanest thing anybody's ever said to me, and it was this whole paragraph. But anyway, I laugh about it now because my instinct in that moment was to get fired up, and I want to defend myself, and I'm, angry that you called me all these things. And suddenly in that moment, it was, it was like I could hear God speaking to me as audibly as I'm talking to you right now. It was
Wow.
crazy. And he was just like, didn't you ask me for this? Didn't you just ask me
Wow.
to cut
Right.
you loose? And and it was and it wasn't upset. It was just like a calm, like somebody reasoning with you, like. And suddenly, I remember at that time in Brookwood, the pastor was going through a series in Joshua called Promises and Power. And there's a chapter in Joshua where it's almost a review of the life of the Israelites. And
Wow.
God just basically like, I did this for you, and you started here, and I took you here. And it's like he's just rattling off these things, and my life felt like that. It was like, oh my gosh, like, Hannah, I've done this for you, and I've been here for you, and I did that for you, and I was here through this, and it's been this and that and the third, and I've stuck by you the entire time. And child, if you want to keep going down this road, I'm going to keep going with you because I am the good shepherd. But aren't you tired? Aren't you tired of it? And when he said it like that, something came out of me and something else filled me back up. And I realized I am tired. I'm exhausted of doing it my way. And now I know what it is to be filled. It's
Yes.
one thing, I think, to read about that, but to know what it is to be fulfilled for the first time in my life, to not need all the things that I thought I needed.
It's refreshing, isn't it? It's a refreshing kind of thing. It's a freeing thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so He
So,
showed me my life in that way. I think of such a clear picture of how he has been alongside me every step of the way.
yeah. And you have continued your devotion to him in your relationship with him. And it has brought you even into serving. You're very active in your church. You are very quick to speak biblical truth if someone is in need. I've heard you give your testimony at Celebrate Recovery, right? And so you're impacting the kingdom. What does that feel like versus what it felt like when you were doing things your way?
It's no comparison. There's no line I can draw. There's no frame of reference that I can paint. It's night and day. It feels like, I mean, it feels like you have been blind.
Mm-hmm.
You've only ever seen and experienced blackness.
Mm-hmm.
And then one day somebody touched your eyes and they opened, and all the colors and the stimulation of light in this world hit you at one time. So to know that part of my life, I talk about it now because I think it's important to talk about it, and especially in the culture and the society that we're experiencing right now in the United States and other parts of the world. But that person that went through it feels so apart from me. It's like I'm telling the
Right.
story of somebody else now. And so when I
I
stood up,
get that.
yeah. So it's like when I stood up and I was giving my testimony, it was like a historical like account of a different person, and I mourned her and buried her so that this person could have life.
Wow, that is so poignant. Um, I think one of the things that I tell my clients when I first meet them is that everybody has a past, and that transparency is something that frees us. Now, we don't stand on the corner and tell just anybody just everything, right? Appropriate disclosure, age appropriate disclosure as well. But if we don't share our struggles, because we were told in scripture, you will face trials and you'll face challenges, right? And if we don't share with others how God has worked in those, what's the point of going through it?
Yeah.
That's sort of where I land with that. So if I've gone through it, be it in my own choosing, right, unwise choosing, right, why wouldn't I want people to know that God is a redemptive God of restoration, not deprivation? And what I hear from you is the Good Shepherd never left you. You were never out of his sight. He wasn't um, yelling at you. I think without getting into every single detail of every single thing that we've ever done that was displeasing to God, we can share and be transparent with other believers and focus the attention on what God did in that, because we're not there anymore. And I think you've done a wonderful job of explaining that today to our listeners. The phone call that I got was out of the blue from you after years. Um, Tell the audience what that was about.
Yeah. So um yeah, to your point, I definitely, what you were saying earlier about sharing our testimony, it's like an unsung song if we don't share it. You know, you have to talk about it. And I'll say too, the parts of your testimony that touch people will surprise you, because when I gave that testimony at Celebrate Recovery, obviously the core of it was what we just discussed, but it was incredible to me the amount of people that walked up to me and felt a deep connection over what I had said about their fathers and their childhood. And so you have to sing that song. It's yours to sing, and only you can sing it. So, but you and I, once that epiphany happened to me, pretty immediately, within days, I started to feel a lot of pressure. Like, you need to reach out to Miss Stephanie. And it's so funny that I think when I first moved into my own apartment, you started to come into my mind, but it was, sort of like a whisper. It wasn't anything. But after that happened, it was like, you need to reach out to Miss Stephanie. Today, Hannah, like, go ahead, And so I sit down and I write this email, and I wrote it and I rewrote it and I rewrote it. And I don't know what I felt. I guess I was like, she may not even remember me, or she may not want to ever speak to me again. I didn't know. And so, but I sent it in faith, and you came back so fast, and was very happy to hear from me, which was great. I mean, that made me feel really good. And you invited me to come to the office and just sit down and chat and catch up. And we had a really good catch up. I feel like so much happened. I still don't think you're all the way caught up, but it
Probably
was
not.
just to have a refresher. Just to have
And
a
you're right.
refresher.
Like I said, I got a phone call, but it was an email. And I do
Yeah.
remember the email, and I remember you asked if I even remembered you. And
Yeah.
yes, of course I remember you. And so it was amazing to hear everything that you had gone through, and to see the person that you are now, and to be able to witness your faith and the journey that you're on with God right now. And I've watched him do some amazing things for you since we have reconnected. So what would be your what would you want people to know if anybody is struggling right now, walking their own path, and they know that it's not what God would have for them, and they are um, feeling that despair, like as you've said, that there's no bottom basically in some of that, or there's no ceiling rather, right? It just keeps
Yeah.
going, but they're stuck in it. What would you want to say to that person right now?
For me, I'll tell you, when one day I asked, um, am I living like this for me? Is this what I want? Or am I living like this because I'm so traumatized that I don't know anything else? And I just decided in my mind that I wanted to find that out, because if it was a response or a defense mechanism or a response to something else, then that meant that I wasn't free.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I would ask you, or that's what I would recommend that you ask yourself, rather, is ask yourself, is this freedom? Is this who I am? Or is this just who I've had to build up? Is this who I felt like I had to become? Am I doing this because of, we're all experiencing sort of a trauma in our own way, and hurt people hurt other people, right? And so, am I wearing this because of somebody else's hurt poured out on me? Just ask that question. Don't the in-depth part of what I'm saying is not the same-sex relationship, because, and I say this all the time, it will only be something else. Okay, you can
Right.
be in a in an opposite attraction relationship and have the same problem. Or you can be addicted to anything. The root of what I'm getting to is ask yourself, are these choices that I've made, okay, or is this a response to something that has happened to me?
Right.
Do yourself a favor and explore that. Because if it is a response, you're not living in freedom, okay? And so that's what you need to be open to asking yourself that question.
Right. I would agree with that. That's a good question to ask. And thank you for your transparency in our discussion. And again, I think it's important to say it's whatever somebody's struggling with that's outside of design that God has.
Mm-hmm.
That's not limited to same sex. It's addiction of one of 1,000 different forms. It's all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
So we're not just zeroing in on just that, but to ask some hard questions and then to seek some help. Scripture says there's wisdom in much counsel,
Yeah.
talking to people that are trusted, um, people that have earned that trust to speak into your life, right?
Yeah.
I think I love the fact that you looked up how to get better friends, and it's to be the friend you want, or that you would want
Yeah.
to, that you would want to have. And
Yeah.
and I think there's a message there for us as believers in how we approach when somebody shares something with us, and responding with love, but with truth. I feel like for you, in the interactions that I've had with you, some of the things we've talked about, you have an ability to respond with love and compassion, and also truth, biblical truth. And I just think I think that's so important. I am really happy for you in your walk with Christ to see everything that has transpired. And you're in school. You can share with the audience what you're in school to become.
Yeah, so I'm currently earning a degree in business, so nothing fancy. But yeah.
So that's really awesome. Thank you so much for being willing to come and talk to us. I greatly appreciate your honesty. I appreciate the fact that you're willing to share your life story and share your faith. That's what it's about. That's what we're
Yeah.
here to serve the kingdom with. So thank you. May have you back on. And you also know that I greatly appreciate the volunteer hours that you have done with Life in Abundance, and the support that you give us. In fact, I want to give credit where credit is due. This podcast was actually Hannah's idea. So, Hannah, I thank you for that. I thank you for that.
You're
You
welcome.
poured
Yeah.
into the ministry, and we're grateful. So
Yeah.
we may have you back in the future to talk about some other topics. Would you come back?
Yeah, of course, anytime. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you,
I would
Hannah.
encourage the listeners, if you're just listening right now, maybe you're on your way to maybe giving Life in Abundance a call, but they're a fantastic team of individuals who they believe what they're saying to you. You know, when they start preaching sometimes, but they believe it, and they're products of it too. That to me, I think is the most important thing. Is it's not just talk. The
Right.
things I'm saying to you, I'm not saying them to you. It's not a script. I lived it, and I know now what it is to have a close relationship with the Father, and to know the Good Shepherd, and the team at Life in Abundance knows that too. So they're a great group of individuals to get to know, and to see you through some of the tough times in your life.
Thank you, Hannah, for that. We're greatly appreciative for it. We'll talk to you soon in another podcast.
All right, take care.
You too.